Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Later in the show, we'll hear from the Chief Executive of Millwall, Steve Kavanagh. And you may not be able to understand Kieran today because he's so excited because he went to see orchestral manoeuvres in the dark last night, didn't you?
Yeah, and it was at the Royal Albert Hall and it was absolutely brilliant. There was nobody there below 60, so it was for OMD fans. It was great, and they were on top form. And I'm going to see the Undertones tomorrow night. So I'm in old git heaven.
Yeah, Fergal Sharkey lives in around here. He works.
Does he?
Yeah. I don't think he can be described as laugh a minute.
No.
He certainly doesn't give the demeanour of a man that you would go up to and say, I used to love the Undertones. Anyway, Kieran, it's Newsday. There's some big news stories, especially about Chelsea coming up. Let's start for once with a good news story. And the FA is going to increase the prize money for the Women's FA Cup tenfold.
Yes, yeah, this is really good money, and it's also new money. So it's not as if the FA is nicking money from the men's game at the lower stages or taking it from the WSL. So the total prize money is going up to £3 million, and it was just over 400 beforehand. So it's a significant increase. Last year, the winners of the Women's FA Cup only made £25,000 compared to the thick end of $2 million for the men's game. So it was pretty unjustifiable. And what we're also hearing, and this is good news, given that we've spoken to people at the grassroots level, is that a lot of that money is going to be allocated to the early rounds to make it a greater reward for progressing at that particular stage of the women's game. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be more money going at the top end, but if it's the usual suspects of the Manchester teams, Chelsea, Arsenal, and so on making the final, they're not the ones who are having to try to crowdfund to get to individual matches. Although Chelsea's women's team, we don't know what's happening with regards there. But under normal circumstances, they are funded. But it is at the grassroots level. So hats off to the FA. They have listened. There has been pressure coming from a variety of sources, and to be fair to them, they've listened. So it's nice to start the show on a good news story. It's been a long time since we've been able to do that.
Yeah, because we spoke about the Clapton Community women's team making less money from the third round than it cost them to get to Plymouth to play the third round game. And from that end of the scale to the ludicrous end of the scale, and one of the many Chelsea stories floating about this week, and we'll be getting on to Middlesbrough, don't worry about that, friends. A Saudi media group has apparently made a £2.7 billion offer to buy Chelsea, and quite apart from the fact I don't think the government would be over the moon about another Saudi group buying into a Premier League team. Is this a genuine offer, Kieran? Is there any more news?
Well, it seems to have come from a journalist who seems quite confident. And there's a lot of leaking taking place to sources. For people who are sort of jockeying for position at present. I think the interesting thing is that there won't be much pushback on the Chelsea side of things, because this is pretty close. In fact, a lot closer than fundamentals would argue. It's very close to the asking price that the club was originally being touted around for. So I think this group is independent of PIF from a legal standpoint. And given that we have more than one American owner, and historically we've had more than one owner of Premier League football clubs from the Far East. The authorities here, or the parties here, would say that Newcastle and Chelsea would therefore be independent of one another. There's another offer that is apparently coming in from the American billionaire Todd Boehly. He is part of a consortium. Based on what we are seeing at present, and this does change. It doesn't change by the hour; it changes by the minute. But the UK-based potential party involved, Nick Candy. He's not involved in that particular consortium, but you don't know who's going to pop up and where. So I think they are still hoping to get bids in by the end of this week. The 18th, 19th of March, with a view to sort of narrowing down the field. And then it could go to sealed bids. That's one way of trying to max out the price. But there's still plenty of unknowns. And one of those unknowns is what's going to happen in terms of the relationship between Roman Abramovich and the government. Yeah. Because at present, you can bid for the club, but nobody can sell it because Roman Abramovich's assets are frozen. If some form of agreement can be made between him and the government in terms of what happens to the proceeds, then that would allow a sale to go ahead, which is in my view, in the interests of all concerned. And I'm not pro or anti Chelsea as a club. You've got to separate the club from the owner, but I am pro Chelsea as an employer of 800 people. Yeah. That's an important factor that needs to be remembered. We're seeing a lot of people saying, we'd be quite happy for Chelsea to go under on the back of this. And I think you need to see the bigger picture. The behaviour of some Chelsea fans has not exactly helped their cause in recent weeks. But it is a club which is the current Champions League holders, and for them to disappear would be an embarrassment for the Premier League. I think it'd be an embarrassment for the country as well. And we take it from there.
Firstly, Kieran, at our age, there's a lot of leaking going on. All over the place. I think we should get that out of the way. And the talk, of course, is that the Saudi media group is totally independent from the Saudi government. But my guess is that if the Saudi government's team were playing the Saudi media group's team in a cup final, I would suggest people might be lent on, Kieran, in that situation. But when it comes to selling the club, are the government... I don't know what laws apply in this situation. I don't think anybody does because it's so unprecedented. Can't be so unprecedented. It's either unprecedented or not unprecedented. But is it the government's job legally to take the highest bidder? Does the government care how much is paid for a club when the money's not going to the person who used to own it anyway?
The government, in theory, should not be getting involved, I would imagine, other than as a guarantor to ensure that the money doesn't go to Roman Abramovich. Given that the government does have, and it has also heralded the trade links that the country has with Saudi Arabia, I think they would be reluctant to get involved and make it awkward for another Saudi group to take over Chelsea. It would not go down well in terms of existing relationships and trade deals, and that's something the government says is taking a pragmatic view of things.
And as you alluded to, Kieran, there are many football fans who are only too happy at Chelsea's current plight, and they would have been delighted by Chelsea's request that their FA Cup quarter-final at Middlesbrough is played behind closed doors for matters of sporting integrity, which the Middlesbrough chairman, that's a sentence that he had great fun playing with. But also, this would have cost Middlesbrough an enormous amount of money, wouldn't it? Just losing the income alone from the game, plus also all the scarves and pies and beer they would have sold.
Yeah. It's costing Middlesbrough money anyway. Chelsea had already sold 600 tickets for the match to take place at the Riverside before the ban took place. I think Chelsea's full allocation was 4,500.
Yeah,
and to be fair to Chelsea, they would have sold it out. They do travelling numbers, as we know. Yeah. So Middlesbrough are going to be financially disadvantaged on the back of this to a greater extent than Chelsea, because Chelsea, they don't get any money sort of directly. The money goes to the home club, and then yes, it is ultimately split between the two clubs. But it's on a proportionate basis, it impacts Middlesbrough more than it does Chelsea. So what's going to happen to those tickets? We're not sure. The Chelsea have been sort of saying, well, could the tickets be given? Could they be gifted to Chelsea fans to allow them to attend, and therefore there would be no money received by the club, and therefore it wouldn't be in breach of the rules, and they'd still get their support. But the original press release from Chelsea was classic inability to understand bigger picture.
Yeah.
Will some fans be inconvenienced because they can't go to Middlesbrough, and instead they get to watch the match in their lounge or in their local pub on a big television with their mates whilst people are dying in Ukraine?
Yeah.
One's an inconvenience, one is a matter of life or death, and I don't want to be melodramatic about this. Bruce Buck, who came in for some pretty stinging criticism from Steve Gibson, the Middlesbrough owner. Bruce Buck has been completely anonymous since all of this started, and I think it can now perhaps be said that I think we hinted it at the time when Roman Abramovich said that the club a couple of weeks ago was going to be transferred for care and stewardship and care into the Chelsea Foundation. Bruce Buck, who is the chairman of Chelsea, also happens to be on the Chelsea Foundation. So he has been Roman Abramovich's man on the ground. He's been his lawyer as well, and I think his silence and reluctance to appear in front of the press and dump it all on Thomas Tuchel is indicative of him as a human being and as a man.
Yeah, I should think Roman Abramovich is highly delighted that his lawyer's keeping stum.
Yes.
And still, with this dreadful conflict, the Court for Arbitration for Sport has rejected Russia's appeal over its UEFA ban.
Well, yes. If you go to the Court for Arbitration for Sport website, which of course nerds do, and I'm a nerd, then what it says is that for the duration of the proceedings. So Russia has put in an appeal, and the initial appeal by Russia has said, look, we've done nothing wrong, which is clearly nonsense. They are still incomplete. Yeah, they're just lying, lying through their teeth.
Us? Ukraine? What? When? What? Yeah,
never heard of it. And what Russia said was that we're putting together an appeal, and that's going to take time. So whilst we are putting together our appeal, for the duration of the proceedings of the case to be heard by CAS, we should therefore be allowed to compete on both an international basis and a European basis. And CAS have turned around and says, no, we're not having any of that. And they've said that Poland will have a bye as far as the qualifiers for the World Cup is concerned. So fair play to CAS. Some of the stuff that has been coming out from Russia, the indignation when people have been squatting in some of the houses of the oligarchs, or the Irish lad who backed his lorry through the gates of the Russian embassy in Dublin, and has actually earned himself a free pint from many people for the rest of his life in Dublin, of course, in doing so.
Yeah. Domestic news, Kieran. Stoke City have sold the Bet365 stadium. Who have they sold it to?
They've sold it to Bet365.
Have they?
Yes, they have indeed. And the great news is a large amount of profit has been made. So,
as we know, Kieran, nothing can ever go wrong when you sell a stadium to yourself.
Yes. So Bet365 own a company called Stoke City Holdings, which in turn owns Stoke City Football Club. And what has happened is that Bet365 has bought the Bet365 stadium from Stoke City Holdings for around £70 million. And given that the EFL has accepted Pride Park is worth 80 million and Hillsborough 60 million, that would appear to be a decent ballpark figure. So nobody's questioning that. We've seen in respect of Derby and Aston Villa and Reading and Birmingham and Sheffield Wednesday, All of those clubs have sold their stadium to themselves. And by a pure coincidence, Sheffield Wednesday have at a points deduction, Reading is at a points deduction, Birmingham is at a points deduction, and Derby County is at a points deduction after that taste. So it does appear to be a bit of a poison chalice for clubs that go down that particular route. Why did it take place in May? It could be due, and as you know, I'm not a cynic, and it could be due that this is just a pure coincidence, that there were plans for changes to the rules of the EFL constitution. And from the 1st of July, if you sold a stadium to another part of the group, none of those profits counted towards your FFP calculation. So, yeah, what a bit of good luck that Stoke City had was that 5 or 6 weeks before the profits would have been excluded, they managed to push through that sale. They managed to persuade Bet365 to buy the stadium for £70 million. How much profit have they made? Somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 million pounds profit, which will count towards their FFP calculation. So, trebles all round.
Thank God you're not a cynic, Kieran, as you say. This pod would be so much more difficult if you were a cynic. You've answered my question there, because obviously I was going to ask you why they've done this now, because they are one of the wealthier owners in the EFL, if not in the Premier League as well. So they're not short of money, are they?
No, and what Stoke have argued on many occasions that we don't need financial fair play. We are richer than God.
Yeah.
If you take a look at they are paying £97 million in dividends to the directors. I think they're paying something like £400 million in wages to the directors. So Bet365 is a very successful organisation. It employs thousands of people. You and I, we both place a bet now and then. We're not opposed to betting. Yeah. We are opposed to the business practices of a part of the industry. But again, you need to be able to separate items. They've always said, we'll put as much money into the club as possible. The trouble is, when they were relegated, they had lots of players on big contracts who they've not been able to get rid of. They've also invested spectacularly in the transfer market, and they've invested spectacularly in those players who can't hack the Saturday, Tuesday lifestyle, and have turned out to be turkeys.
When you have a spare moment, Kieran, in your very busy schedule, could you sort out a spreadsheet to work out exactly how much God is worth?
Yes.
Because it's either nothing or an awful lot, basically, because technically God should have given everything away. But
That's true.
A lot of Wolves fans have been asking us when this would happen, Kieran, but they seem to have had some good news. Now, they're out of UEFA's FFP settlement regime, and it seems that they were in it for a long time, as Wolves fans were pointing out. So what does this mean on practical financial terms for Wolves?
Well, I think the good news from Wolves' perspective is that they did have a limit, I think, in terms of squad size from a UEFA participation point of view. So this was an announcement that was made by UEFA recently, and it also affected CSKA. FC Sporting, Porto, and one or two other clubs who had been on the naughty step, and those other clubs were in danger of being excluded from European competition, whereas Wolves were just told, can you cut back on your spending a bit? So Wolves have complied. So I think, I know some Wolves fans, they're saying, well, why we've not been going into the transfer market to the extent that we would have liked. It has been to sort of broadly try to get the club into a position whereby if it now qualifies to play in Europe, it can do so relatively unhindered. And of course, Wolves have had a fantastic season in terms of results, and are there or thereabouts for a Europa League or a Europa Conference place next season. So they appear to have done the right thing as far as the beaks are concerned, and could go forward.
Kieran, one of the bleakest days of my football supporting life was when Palace lost at home to Maidstone United in front of about 4,000 people a long time ago. So this is technically good news, but I'm bitter and resentful. As Martin Marr says, I can forgive, but I can't forget or forgive. Maidstone United made a profit of £41,000 in 2021, or 20/21, I beg your pardon, which is good going in the current climate, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So we have we've not spoken about non-league and national league clubs too much recently.
No, which is good.
Which is not hearing about us from us it tends to be good news. I think Maidstone are another indication of a club that has done its best to utilise what's available to them. There has been distribution of money from central funds. It has utilised the furlough scheme and so on. And it's wanting to invest into the community and so on. So fair play to Maidstone. It's on the right side of the line as far as I'm concerned. I'm not keen on football clubs trying to make lots of profit, but a sensible break-even model has a lot of merit, because that means that you're not falling into that trap, as we've seen with Chelsea, of being reliant on the owner. And I had an interesting text exchange with our very good friend Tracy Crouch over the weekend, and she said, this completely vindicates the approach that if you've got a loss-making business or loss-making industry and you're reliant on the owner, what happens if something happens to the owner? Nobody could have foreseen what did happen in respect of Abramovich, but then you wouldn't have foreseen what would have happened to the likes of Tony Xi and some of the other people involved with football as well. If you become indebted to them, you become dependent upon them, and if their circumstances change, that can throw the whole future of the football club out of kilter.
Funnily enough, your relationship with Tracy Crouch is mentioned in the upcoming interview.
Is it?
It is, yeah. You had to leave, didn't you? But does the Baroness know that you're swapping racy text messages with Tracy Crouch? Do you slip into another room and just say, "I'm just taking the dog for a walk, darling"? Get the other phone out and text Tracy. Kieran, if 80% of the football population are enjoying Chelsea's plight at the moment, which I'm afraid they are, I think that number for this last story goes up to 99%. And I never thought in my lifetime I could foresee any circumstances, Kieran, in which I started any phrase with the words "John Terry's collection of non-fungible tokens." It seems to me like Bob Mortimer is the person who should be reading out a phrase like John Terry's collection of non-fungible tokens. But it turns out that John Terry's collection of non-fungible tokens have plummeted in value by 90% over the past month. Is it just his collection of non-fungible tokens that have plummeted? Not that we're enjoying any man losing money, but it's a strange. Is it just him? Did he choose wrongly? Did he invest wrongly? Did he choose the wrong NFTs?
Well, sadly, I don't think John Terry will have lost very much at all.
Right.
The mugs who bought his non-fungible tokens, his magic beans, will have lost out. So for those people not familiar with the issue, what is a non-fungible token? It's a bit like if you or I did a drawing, or if you or I had a special photo, and we signed it, we authenticated it. And the thing about NFTs is that, and clubs do this. If you think about that 0-0 draw you've just had against Manchester City. If you were able to go and get if you were able to get your goalkeeper's shirt, and the club said, "We're putting this up for auction. He's going to sign it. You'll get a certificate of authenticity that goes with it." That would be great, but the pool of people who are likely to buy it are going to be relatively close to those people that attended the match and so on. The thing about a non-fungible token is that because it is digital, you can sell that to anybody on the planet, and therefore that increases the potential number of buyers of these. So John Terry had this artwork done, which he was prepared to effectively sign his name to, and you could bid for it, and people did buy it, and then that's fine. I've got some signed shirts. You've probably got some signed shirts. You've got mementos. You've interviewed Muhammad Ali and things like this. I'd imagine you've got loads of mementos from your career in the world of entertainment, and that has sentimental value. It might have some financial value as well, but it's mainly sentimental. The shirts. I've got a shirt signed by Sir Geoff Hurst. There's no way I'm going to give that away, as far as I'm concerned. And that's great. But what we're seeing with NFTs is they are being marketed as investments.
Yeah.
Now, the vast majority of this stuff is overpriced to begin with, and that's what we've seen with John Terry's collection. People have thought, okay, what exactly have we bought here? It's a picture of some animal, signed off by John Terry, and it's been authenticated by people on the internet. And go, we've been mugged off.
Yeah.
And therefore the market price of these has fallen. And that's also been the case of what's referred to as fan tokens by too many clubs. And sadly, it looks like the Premier League is going to go down this route. There is a story circulating that it's got not one but two potential NFT products coming onto the market soon. With a view to engaging with fans. Now, for engaging, it means dropping your trousers and emptying out your pockets.
Yeah. Why do you have to drop your trousers before you? Never mind. That's you.
Well, that's sorry. I'm going back to one of my former industries there. I'd say.
It's always good. I noticed in your many media engagements last Thursday that the leading expert in football finance in the UK didn't once use the expression "mugged off." when you were talking to the BBC and Channel 4, it would have been very entertaining if you'd suddenly turn around and say, well, Chelsea fans have been mugged off, haven't they? I didn't interview Muhammad Ali, but I have met Muhammad Ali and chatted to him.
Sorry.
I didn't interview him. And I don't have a signed goalkeeper shirt. I do have a signed Julian Speroni glove.
Very good.
But yeah, most of SE25 has a signed Julian Speroni. Julian is the most generous man you'll ever meet in your life. So there's no one short of. What do they say? Scarcity drives the value up, isn't it? There's no danger of that happening. Also, I have to say, I have mentioned this before, John Terry. Despite his reputation, and some of it I believe is probably justified, he did an enormous kindness to my cousin when he was injured for a year and out of the game of football. He spent a long time chatting to him and talking him through being out injured. So I'll always be grateful to John Terry for that, but not enough that I'm not laughing at the fact that his non-fungible tokens have plummeted in value by 90% over the past month. Now, Kieran, interview time. I still find it hard to believe, Kieran. I'm so friendly with a Brighton fan sometimes. So imagine my delight when producer guy said he was throwing the chief executive of Millwall into the price of football bucket. It turned out that Steve Kavanagh, chief executive of Millwall, was a very nice man and a very interesting man.
Yeah.
And we had a very good chat, and here it is. Steve, thank you very much for joining us this morning. As I mentioned, it does feel a little bit odd, a Brighton fan, a Millwall fan and a Palace fan on a pod together, but I think it's a sign of the enlightened times that we live in. And you're only 3 points off the playoffs, Stevie. Are you daring to dream?
Morning, gents. Are we daring to dream? We're enjoying ourselves and we're enjoying the Championship. It's a fantastic league and competitive as ever. And you always dare to dream. Well, that's what football's about, isn't it? Dreaming and having that chance.
And are teams like you and Coventry and Luton proof that you can be competitive in that division without spending crazy money on fees and wages? Because you've refused to do that, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it demonstrates that if you've got stability and financial stability behind you, I'll get my words out in a second, then you can create a platform to allow you to grow and develop. And that's what we've been doing in the 5 years in the Championship. And those guys have come in behind us and they probably won't admit it, but they're following a similar model where they grow year on year and then have a chance.
Yeah, I will undoubtedly get words wrong in the course of this interview. Don't worry, Steve, partly because I'm a little bit fragile this morning. Nobody should celebrate a 0-0 draw against anybody as much as we celebrated last night. Steve, tell us a little bit about life before Millwall and how you came to the club.
I'm for my sins, I'm an accountant. I actually joined a company that was called Stoy Hayward when I joined them back in the 1980s, which is now BDO. So I was there for a long time, worked in the city for a little bit and an internet startup when that was all the rave, at a turnover of £1, and then went, after I left, they went bust. And then I ended up at Charlton as finance director, and that was 20 years ago now. So I spent a long time at Charlton, left there in 2012 under a non-disclosure agreement, as most people do. And then Southend for 4 years, learning how to avoid paying anyone. And then Millwall, thankfully, John Berylson came along, and I met with John, and I joined Millwall in 2016. And that year we got promoted in the playoffs, and since then 5 years in the Championship. So it's 20 years in football, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I want to come on to something that the owner of Southend said about you later on, but I read an interview recently, which it fascinated me, because you said shortly after taking over the Millwall, you said a football club is not one business, but multiple businesses which shouldn't coexist. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think if you look at a football club as one entity, then I think you miss what's really going on as a business person, as an accountant and a finance person. You've got the hospitality side, you've got ticketing, you've got the sponsorship side, you've then got the TV revenues, you've then got cost centres such as football, which and some of those have conflicting requirements, because you need the income obviously to drive the football side, but the football side then sucks that income, and people running those other businesses can look at that and say, well, they're taking all of our money, but without the other one, they don't exist. So they all have to happily coexist together, and you have to find ways of balancing those off. And then it comes together under this umbrella of a football club, and that makes it quite unique, because you're not running an individual business; you're running 5, 6, 7, 8 businesses.
And do you ever find any conflict then between those different businesses at a club, where one group will think that they're more important than the other, for example?
Yeah, obviously the football side are more important than everything, aren't they?
Yeah, of course.
Of course you see conflicts, and you see the business side looking at the football side with jealousy, because they get everything they need, and the rest of the businesses have to beg, borrow, and steal to get by. But your job is to make them happily coexist, and to bring them together, and to all get behind the one objective, which is the success of the team. Because if the team do well, then obviously the other businesses are allowed to flourish and grow as well.
Is it a lonely job being a CEO? Are you isolated from other clubs, or are you in regular touch with other CEOs to swap ideas and information, or gossip about Derby, for example? Do you...
We definitely don't gossip. We talk a lot, because you compete on the pitch, obviously, and there's a healthy rivalry there. But off the pitch, you share ideas and points, because actually the vast majority of us all want the same thing. We all love football. We want football to survive and grow. We want the Championship to flourish, and therefore our needs are very, very similar. But of course, come match day, we shake hands, wish each other best of luck, say we don't really mean it, and then hopefully win and shake their hands at the end and say, "Oh, sorry about that," and smile as you walk away. So no, there's a good relationship between the CEOs. It's been challenged in the last few years, and the attitudes and the work of certain clubs have managed to stress those relationships. But there's a good hardcore of people that have been there a reasonable time, know what they're doing, and work together. And actually, I think there's a good, bright future for the EFL. Trevor Birch is doing a good job in helping us restore that camaraderie between us all.
But clubs like you must look at Derby and think, well, that's what can happen when you don't cut your cloth accordingly, and that must make you more convinced that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, Derby's it's a very distressing situation, and there are other clubs who've followed similar lines and thankfully managed not to go into administration. And yet, sustainability of football and the longevity of football is a key priority for all of us, because that's what we're in it for, right?
It's strange as well, Steve. Sometimes it seems that money can cause its own problems. We were talking about Everton the other day, and for a decade under Bill Kenwright, when they didn't have much money, they trundled along quite nicely. They didn't have too much debt. They were competing in the Premier League. And suddenly they get a new owner with access to a lot of money, and that seems to bring its own problems somehow, which seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the things you always, when you look at football, you got these people that make a lot of money in business, and they buy a football club, and they everything they understood and ran properly in a business they tend to throw out the window,
Yeah.
which is where the management of clubs is really important, and CEOs who are finance people or good finance people. Like we've got Mark Fairbrother here, who's a great guy sitting behind me. Those people come to the fore in making sure that sensible decisions are made at the business level.
You mentioned your time at Southend. The owner of Southend United called you one of the toughest negotiators he'd ever met. I'm not sure that's a compliment coming from him, but would you would you agree with that?
I think I'm harsh, but hard, but fair.
The Millwall way, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. That cold stare occasionally, and say, Uncle Kevin's around the corner. Don't worry.
Sorry, I want to bring Kieran in on the back of this next question as well. But you mentioned your financial background. Do you think it's more important for a CEO to have a financial background than to have a football background?
Yes, I do.
Well,
I think if you get carried away by the football side of things and lose the perspective of, at the end of the day, it is a business, you have got to pay the wages, then not having that deep understanding of what is really important and the long-term sustainability of the club, if you lose that and get too into the football, then bad things can happen.
Kieran, I presume you'd agree with that, but it's interesting that Steve already has mentioned several times the idea of long-term sustainability of the club. It's something that Steve Parish is also into, and I gather you would agree with that as well, wouldn't you?
Yeah, totally. You get the foundations right, and everything else will follow. And Steve's exactly right. So if Millwall, they're doing superbly this season, if they don't get it, what they've not done is gambled the house, as we've seen in the case of other clubs. So yeah, I'm entirely in agreement.
But can you? I'll ask you both this: can you apply the same principles that you've learned in other businesses to football?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why couldn't you? Football is an unusual business. It isn't necessarily about the day-to-day profit and loss, but you have to have that in mind. It's an investment business, and you have to invest to take it forward. But any investment business has to invest sensibly.
Yeah. On Price of Football, Steve, we prefer to use the word identity rather than brand. And Millwall are one of those clubs that certainly have a strong identity. But how difficult is it for the smaller London clubs to grow a bigger fan base when you're competing against huge teams just a few miles away? And I don't mean Palace in that, by the way.
Well, I hope you don't mean Charlton. I hope you don't mean Charlton either. But
no, we can all laugh. We can all laugh at Charlton. That's fine.
That's unfair. I know a lot of Charlton fans. I've never been there, so. Look, of course, it's difficult, and we have that identity, that unique identity, which at times can be challenging, but also it's really appealing because people enjoy that live match day experience, and there's nothing better than the Den when it's full and the atmosphere that our fans create, and they're unbelievable in what they can create, and they're unbelievable people. The amount of money they give to charity,
oh yeah,
all that side of things gets lost. So is it challenging? Yes, but actually compared to say an Arsenal where there's no atmosphere, I'd say it's fairly easy to get fans who enjoy the atmosphere, and when they come along. A lot of people. I brought a lot of people along who aren't necessarily Millwall fans, and they leave saying that was brilliant. I love that, and that is what coming to the Den on a match day is about.
Well, it must be frustrating for you. And I say this as a Palace fan, so I know football in South London, and I know what your club does in terms of community, in terms of young people. So it must be really frustrating when it's still the headlines are taken by a few idiots. But it's it seems strange to me. I've got a mate of mine, a very old mate, he's in his 70s now, proper Millwall fan, has been all his life. He's still a bit bemused by the fact that you're sponsored by a chocolate bar.
It's not a chocolate bar.
Oh, it's not a chocolate bar.
No, he needs to look a bit. It's a chocolate drink.
Oh, it's chocolate drink. I beg your pardon.
Husky actually is quite. It's almost a Red Bull-esque brand that's being created. They sponsor a lot of clubs now. They're on the back of they were on the back of the McLaren F1 car. I think they still are. And it's almost a brand like Red Bull that they're trying to create across the skiing empires and different sports as well. And Michael, who runs Husky, is an amazing individual who's got a very unusual background. But it's brilliant for a football club to have a sponsor that isn't a betting industry.
Oh, and, don't get started on that.
It takes us into a world where we're we're given a bad rep on many things through potentially, actually, I think, not through the small minority of idiots, through lazy journalism most of the time.
Yeah.
And the work that the club does in the community, the fact that we've got a great sponsor that isn't a betting, that's not. It's not a good story, is it? It doesn't sell for papers. But actually, it's a story that is developing and growing. And hopefully, over time, the fantastic atmosphere and what the club does will start to come to the fore.
We talk a lot on this pod about the relationship between gambling and football. Can you see a time in a few years when gambling sponsorship is banned in the same way that alcohol and tobacco was?
I think so. I think we've got to be careful that we don't pick out football and make it unique. And horse racing without gambling would be dead.
Yeah.
So why should football not have gambling? But at the same time, I think we need to show a level of responsibility to our fans and to the younger audiences, and we need to redefine that relationship with gambling. Yes, it's important to us, but we're as important to them as they are to us.
Yeah, see, I'm aware of my own hypocrisy here because I'm very, very disturbed by the level of gambling involved in football. But yeah, I'll be watching the Cheltenham Festival on TV today. I'll probably have a fiver on the race and worry about losing it. But so it's strange. The one big question I want to ask you about sponsorship: how much do Selhurst Timber pay you to get such a problem? It's just the one thing that Palace fans it just makes me laugh. All these Millwall fans are standing above a sign saying Selhurst.
I think we give it to them for free just to piss you off.
You recently, now the club, it shows your ambition because you recently purchased a big area of land in Kent with, and I quote from the Evening Standard here, a view to build training facilities which will be among the best in the country. How is that progressing? How much will it cost and why is it so important?
Yeah, our training sites are split between Bromley and Blackheath Rugby Club up on the A2. We don't own them. We lease them. The club did own the training ground. And I think it was under Theo Pafitis that it was sold and leased back for a financial reason many, many years ago. So actually owning your own facility where you can bring all the academy and the first team together, bring the whole club together. Yeah, the Den is your match day. It's your outward home. It's the iconic image of what the club is. But the training ground actually is your office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And that's vitally important. So we've identified that land. We're running through the planning application now. Hopefully that will be submitted in the next couple of months with a view to hopefully getting a positive result before the end of the summer. And then we've got to start building it. And I've got to fund building it, which is going to be the interesting part. But it is really important to the long-term future of the club to give us that identity and that home that we can then also use in terms of recruiting players. Because as great as Bromley is, it's a load of old porter cabins that are popped together, and quite frankly, it's a shithole. Not Bromley itself, by the way, before anyone from Bromley gets upset. But so we're trying to really look forward and to build something which, along with the development that hopefully will happen around the Den, that we can be really proud of and give this club that foundation to carry on growing.
I say this as someone from Croydon, Steve. I think anybody from Bromley listening will go, yeah, that's a fair point. Partially right. How will you fund it then? Because it's obviously going to cost you a lot of money, and also will it upgrade your academy status as well? Presumably, the academy will be based there too.
Yeah, the academy's Cat 2 anyway. So the facilities that we're planning are for Cat 2, but actually you don't need any more facilities to get to Cat 1. So the aspiration to get to Cat 1 one day is possible, but we'd stay at Cat 2 for the moment. The categorisations and EPPP is an area that is really important at the moment to football and is changing, and the funding around that, because if you clubs lose young players to Cat 1 clubs, and if that keeps going on, you either shut the academy or you all go to Cat 1, which would be crazy. So it will deliver that togetherness, which is more important, especially for some a club like Millwall. Actually, that togetherness is what gets us through most things.
So is it a problem for you that Palace have just gone to Category 1 then? Does it make it harder for you to compete for youngsters in that area?
I don't think it makes it harder to compete for them, but the Cat 1 clubs can walk all over you in terms of their financial compensation when you start losing them at the ages of 13, 14, 15. And that loss of those good players that you've developed is a real challenge, because at some point the board will turn around and say, why are we investing £2 million a year in this academy? So we need to be careful that in football we don't allow. We got to keep the pyramid structure in the academy structure as well as in the first teams, and make sure that structure flows properly and the finances flow properly.
And what about funding it? Is there any other way of funding it other than loans?
There's a variety of ways which we're exploring. So loans is one possible one. Looking at the structure of the business and how we invest in the business is another. So we're exploring those options now. It's not an area where we're overly concerned, but it isn't going to be cheap. Obviously, building on what is currently a wheat field, building a top-end academy is going to be expensive.
Yeah. Finally, Steve, two questions we have to ask, or Kieran gets sulky. He's a big fan of Tracy Crouch. I mean, a big fan. It's literally Kieran and Tracy sitting in a tea, Kissing. So I'd like to ask you your view of her fan-led report. You're ahead of her in some aspects because for example, you've got a fan member on the board, for example, haven't you?
Yeah, we've had a fan member on the board. What Tracy's moving to and looking at is a shadow board, and actually we're exploring that now because it gives a greater depth to how fan bases don't all sit in one supporters club together, do they? They tend to be spread out. So we're exploring currently now how we form a shadow board in line with Tracy's report to give that greater communication with the fans. As hopefully you're aware, we commit to writing from myself to the fans at least every 2 months, and we've been doing that for over a year now, and that's important. And then having that shadow board and that engagement and communication is critical, not just for the fans but for the club as well, because when there are issues you want to be dealt with, you want to be able to go and talk to people and get to everyone. You don't want to just you don't have to go and talk to 10 people. So from the fan engagement perspective, what Tracy says, absolutely support it. And we're working on how we can tick those boxes, but actually really deliver on that rather than just being a box ticking exercise. From a redistribution and regulation perspective, I'm all for it. We've doubled our wage bill since we got into the championship. It increases dramatically the costs of running a football club. We need redistribution, but redistribution can't come unless it's hand in hand with regulation. And if you bring redistribution and regulation together that says you can't lose more than, well, you can't lose money, because I think Gary Sweet says, it's crazy in the championship. You lose 13 million and you get a pat on the back and told, what a good boy. And he's absolutely spot on. Yeah. So if you got to a scenario we're saying you can't lose more than £1 million, but actually we've given you redistribution so that when the money goes into the top end, it doesn't just get blown out the bottom end, I'm all for that. How that's regulated, to be seen. And unfortunately, I think when you look at Chelsea at the moment, the government have probably shown they don't fully understand football, but I think there's probably a halfway house that's fair to everyone.
I don't think anyone understands the government's attitude to Chelsea. This idea that whoever buys Chelsea's got to sit down with somebody from our government and negotiate a price and then decide where the money's going is slightly ludicrous, but that's for a different pod.
Yeah.
I love the shadow board thing. It's such a good idea. It comes back to something you were talking about earlier. When I'm in the pub before the game last night at the Parsons Arms, I'm talking to builders, cabbies, accountants, lawyers. There's a judge. There's people from all walks of life, and people outside football don't understand that. They seem to, like you say, lazy journalism. They have this stereotype of football fans, and the idea of a shadow board to those people would be preposterous. But no one knows more about football and about a club and its history than the fans. So it's important to have them involved, isn't it?
It is, and look, there are certain things that should be off the agenda when you have those conversations. You shouldn't be talking about what player you can or can't buy. You should be talking about the relationship between the club and the fans and how you develop that and grow that for a mutual benefit. And that's what it should be about. And if you see it as mutual benefit, then why wouldn't a club embrace that? Why would you want to disenfranchise the very people that pay the wages?
Yeah, I suppose also the other problem is you don't want to be sitting in a board meeting saying to the fans, can we stop talking about Harry Cripps now?
Well, the fan on the board scenario is always a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they go in a board meeting, they've got fiduciary duties, they walk out and everyone in the pub says, what do they say? Tell me about this. And says, oh, I'm not allowed to say anything because I'm a director. So the shadow board actually gets around that, and you can have a much more engaging conversation and clearly define what you want to talk about. And I think it's a great idea.
The final question, and I've got a feeling I can predict what your answer may be on this, but the highest of Kieran's many high horses is is parachute payments. What's your view on parachute payments?
Like redistribution needs to happen. The relationship between the Championship and the Premier League is now completely distorted.
Oh.
I mean, the Premier League, centrally you get, before you've even sold a single bean, you get 100 million. In the Championship, you get 7.5 million. That relationship between the two is distorted now beyond all reasonable levels, and parachute monies just pile on top of that. And I was talking to an ex-player yesterday who's a presenter. Sorry, that's my emails flying in. I was talking to a presenter yesterday, and I think he nailed it. You didn't used to get the scenario where the clubs that came down went straight back up.
Yeah.
In the last few years, that has changed. As that financial gap's got bigger, more and more are going back up, and then COVID has come along, and COVID has handcuffed the Championship clubs and their levels of investment, and actually it's widened that gap even more. I know you guys talk about it, that we've paid the HMRC our COVID losses, we're paying them off through this loan. We've got another 2 years of £3 million a year. That's a big hamstring to us. So you've seen a real change, and you're seeing more and more clubs relegated going straight back up, and that's not good for football, and parachutes come into that. We need to level that line between the two leagues. Getting promoted shouldn't be the be-all and end-all to the extent that people are gambling the futures of clubs, because that's wrong for fans. But being promoted obviously should be financially good. But then if you come down also, it shouldn't be the end of the world. You shouldn't be falling off a cliff face and need a parachute. If it's a slope, you don't need a parachute.
Yeah.
And then actually we can create a better pyramid in football that is better for all the fans.
Yeah. Steve, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I suppose normally I end these interviews by wishing you luck, but I'm not entirely sure I can do that. But obviously it would be great to have Millwall back in the Premier League. I remember that's the 2 seasons you were in Division 1, wasn't it? Which was it 2 seasons when you really shook the place up. So it'd be great to have a London club back in the Premier League. And I wish you all the best for the future, Steve. Thank you for talking to us.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kieran.
It's interesting, Kieran, you had to go because you had to teach, which I believe is what you do when you're not on telly.
That's right.
So, because normally it's you who does, you're the more sociable one of the two of us. Normally it's you at the end of the interview. I make an excuse, normally involving the cat, and disappear while you chat to people as the thing uploads. But we chatted, and unfortunately, I wish I had the gumption to asking this question during the actual interview afterwards. But he spoke very interestingly about marketing the Championship as Premier League 2. Because he said, in effect, that's what it is. And he said it's arguably a better product, for want of a better word, than the actual Premier League. And also it would go a long way to stopping the desperation of Championship teams spending so much money. And it was very interesting in the main body of the interview to hear him talk about the fact that it is perfectly possible, despite what people seem to think, it's perfectly possible to compete in the Championship with a sensible budget, with sensible wages and paying sensible money for players. Yeah,
well, we've got Coventry, Luton, Millwall. We've got clubs doing it. Blackburn, Huddersfield are on. They've got a low budget, and what Steve said echoed. With Keith Wynerson, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he said exactly the same thing. It is a cracking league, and whilst be careful what you wish for. If my team got relegated, then instead of looking forward, are we going to win 10 games this season? You're hoping they can win 20. Yeah, because it's A, there's more matches, and B, you feel that your natural position is going to be towards the top half of the table rather than looking over your shoulder for 6 months of the year.
Yeah, it may not be what you wish for, Kieran, but obviously, he was very interesting as well about parachute payments and how they skewer everything as well. There was one moment though when it reminded me of another resident of Bermondsey, your Uncle Terry, when I asked Steve about the funding, building the new training ground. I said, I presume it'll be loans. He went, well, loans is one way. There are other ways, right? Okay, I won't delve into that. And talking of loans, if you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, please go to patreon.com/priceoffootball, and we would be very grateful to you. That's lovely. The pod will always be free to air. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thanks as always, folks. I've contacted your producer guy. I think there is literally a handful of tickets available for Price of Football Live on Thursday, the 24th of March. Now, for those of you going there, and Kevin, you've already been there. It's not the easiest place to find. Is that right?
It's not. You can't spot it from. If you're looking for floodlights, you won't see any. It's opposite Quick Fit. But it's not immediately noticeable from outside. It's not far from Tooting Broadway, but yeah, you do need to check where it is, and the main entrance is sort of around the corner. So probably best to Google map it before you go if you don't know the area.
Yeah, great. So, if you can support us via Patreon, there's various other ways you can do it. You just engage with us on social media. We're bored and lonely old men. We normally reply. Yeah, we're not letting this go to our heads, I can assure you, and rightly so. But another way you can do that is to go to your podcast app, Apple, Spotify, Google apps, whatever it wants to, and if you leave us a review for reasons beyond our knowledge, or let's be honest, beyond our caring. It does help us in the charts, according to producer Guy, and that helps to drive interest from sponsors and gives us a bit more credibility when we go, do you fancy coming on our podcast, mate? And they'll go, who the hell are you? So people tend to look you up. So if you could give us a review, you could give us 5 stars, that would be grand. It doesn't matter what you write. You could say you'd rather have the show presented by Julian Speroni and Lisa Stansfield. And that would be a must listen, I think, for both of us.
Well, I'd have to be at that one.
Right.
If only to watch Julian's face as he tries to interpret what Lisa Stansfield is saying in her wonderful Rochdale accent. You're not bored, Kieran. You're going to the Undertones next week. You'll be texting Tracy Crouch on the train on the way to the Undertones.
Don't tell the Baron.
That's not
or the Baroness even.
Oh, there's a Baron in the process now, is there? No, I'm looking forward to the live show. I'll ask you about the Baron. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.